Welcome to Bookends of Recovery. I'm Laura. If you're struggling with triggers today, know that you are not alone because I've been there too. And together, we're going to break them down so you can keep moving forward on your recovery and healing journey. Sobriety and emotional freedom, it's not just a dream, it is within your reach. Man, triggers. Ugh, they're those sneaky emotional responses that they feel like they just come out of nowhere, right? You think you're doing okay, and then wham, a feeling hits you like a ton of bricks. But here's the good news. You can manage them. In fact, you need to manage them. And today we're going to explore how. I remember the first time I realized I had been triggered by my DOC. And for those of you that might be newer to this journey, DOC stands for drug of choice. This can be anything from alcohol to prescription pills or even behavioral addictions. But that first time, I had been clean for a while, and that unexpected trigger, I was walking into an old place, like an old haunt that I hadn't been with in a while. And bam, that feeling of wanting to use my DOC hit me. And it was so overwhelming that I froze for a moment. But here's the thing I didn't know back then, because, I hadn't been through any kind of, I hadn't gone to meetings, I hadn't done any kind of counseling, nothing. That moment didn't define me. It was a trigger. And with the right tools, I could navigate it in a healthy way, and so can you. So over the next few weeks, I'll be doing a series on triggers, and this is part 1. So what is a trigger? Of course, they're going to vary from person to person, depending on what our DOC is, or what we may be healing from. And they're usually an uncontrollable emotional response caused by specific stimulus around us. And they make us want to use our DOC or engage in our addictive or unhealthy behavior. And as I've mentioned before, I've been on both sides of this coin, both on the recovery side and on the healing side. So I've been triggered to want to use my DOC, and I've been triggered to want to engage in unhealthy behaviors. So I've had to learn how to find coping skills and ways to manage my triggers when they've hit. So knowing how to navigate through our triggers early in recovery saves us so much undue stress and anxiety. And I cannot, speaking of stress, I cannot stress enough how much I wish that I had found these tools and these techniques sooner, because I could have saved myself so much just undue stress, because I didn't know about these things. I didn't know they were out there. And of course, this was all before, the internet and all that cool stuff. So these tools, these tips, these techniques, knowing how to do these things helps us maintain our sobriety and can help keep us emotionally stable. And it also puts us on the path for emotional sobriety. So let's talk a little bit about the science of triggers. Because triggers can mimic quote unquote threats to the brain. And that's what can cause that fight or flight response to activate unnecessarily. And that happens because our brains, the reward part, the dopamine, and the stress systems get rewired during addiction. But the really cool thing is our brains, I know, wait for it. Here comes my favorite word. Our brains are malleable. And that means that they can be rewired and retrained. So that's fantastic news for those of us that are in recovery and healing. It means that we are not powerless. That's right. We're not powerless like it was once thought that we were. Because I cannot tell you how many times I was told, once an addict, always an addict. You have no power over this. That's bullshit. We are not powerless like it was once thought. Our brains can create new, healthy pathways for us to travel. So the more those healthy pathways are traveled, the old ones fall away. So think of your brain like a garden. During addiction, your brain's pathways are like weeds that have just taken over those unhealthy automatic responses. But with recovery and with healing, you're planting new seeds, healthy, healing ones. The more you water these seeds, the more your brain rewires itself. And over time, well, those old weeds, they start to die and fade away. So we're going to encounter different kinds of triggers. And we'll talk more about that next week. But they're, situational, environmental, they're external, and they're internal. So the internal will be emotional and mental. And some of the most common triggers for those in recovery and healing are going to be stress and anxiety. We can't avoid it. I'd love to. I wish there was I don't know if anyone remembers well, now I'm really going to sound old because I barely remember it. But there was this old show called Soap, and the guy would sit in a tub and he would wave his hands in front of him, and he would think it would just disappear because that would just, make him disappear, he thought. I think there's kind of a dark side to that. I think maybe he had some kind of traumatic event happen to him. But, if we wanted to wave a magic wand and just make, all these things disappear, but that's just not how life works. We can't avoid it. Stress and anxiety are a part of life. But instead of letting stress and anxiety bog us down, we need to find tools that can help us reduce those things. So now that we know what a trigger is and how these triggers can affect us, let's dive a little bit into, some tools to consider adding into your toolkit. So there are things like, grounding techniques like we've talked about before, right? Counting and the alphabet, because that's quick and easy because it's quick to recall, and it's something that that you can do fast, quick, fast, in a hurry. And we want to do grounding techniques because these techniques bring you into the present. And we do that because when you're being triggered, it's your brain's, like I said, it's that fight and flight. your brain is being pulled down, pulled back into its recovery. I like to say the addict voice, but it's being pulled back into the old pathways. We want to bring it to the present so you're not getting swallowed into those, you know, cesspool thoughts and all that. We want the urge, we're going to ride we'll talk about that in a second. We're going to, ride that wave of the urge. You don't want to get sucked into it. So if you don't have a lot of tools at hand, counting in the alphabet is a quick thing because you already know it. And just being able to try it with me real quick. Go ahead and say the alphabet. Yeah, it sounds a little silly, but try it. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, you're with me in the present because you know it. And now try counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, you're counting with me and you brought yourself to the present because you're counting with me together. Something else that you can do is something like bursting the bubble. And this is where something that I used to do, I would picture what had caused the anxiety or the trigger, and I imagined what it was that caused the trigger, and I would put it in a thought bubble. Those things that would float above somebody's head, like in a comic. And rather than focus on what was in the thought bubble, the trigger, I focused on outlining the thought bubble. And so I would just outline it in silver. And then I pictured a needle and I would pop the bubble. And soon I would just be so distracted by popping bubbles because I would let the thought just kind of float by and pop the bubble. Because sometimes my thoughts would get super obsessive. And so if that was the case, then I could just put the thought inside the bubble, let the thought be there, and just outline the cloud or the thought or whatever, and just pop it. And before long, it just kind of became a game to me, where rather than focus on what was in it, I could focus on what was outside of it, outlining it, and pop it. And for me, it was more of a distraction technique than anything else. And that's what we're doing. We're learning to bring things forward, not focus on the actual trigger, but rather just stay in the present. Another technique you can use, which is very similar to bursting the bubble, is leaves falling, where you picture the tree. And I like to picture mine in the fall, even though I'm not a fan of cold weather. I do find the leaves very pretty in the fall. And we have one in our neighborhood that every year, it's like we have a park in the front of our neighborhood. Every year it just turns this bright, orangey yellow, and it just looks like it's on fire. It's gorgeous. But it, and when the leaves just fall, it's just so pretty. And so I tend to imagine that particular tree, and I imagine the bright color of that fall leaf, and I would place, either the trigger or the emotion on that leaf, and then I imagine the leaf falling to the ground. And as the leaf fell to the ground, I imagine my anxiety being released and letting go of it. So if there's something that resonates with you, you can do that too. So maybe it's not, a tree, maybe it's something else. So just use your imagination in that way. Something else you can try is doodling. We've talked, ad nauseum probably about journaling and word vomiting, right? About how cathartic that can be. But you can also doodle to help bring yourself to the present. So just grab a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and just allow your hand to move freely. Don't worry about what it's drawing. Just do some shapes and some patterns, and don't worry about the outcome. Just focus on the movements of your hand and not worrying about what it's creating. and of course the ever popular 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. Again, how the alphabet and counting brought you to the present quickly. This exercise will now bring you to the present and keep you there. Because again, we're trying to get you out of your urge or keep you from going into that cesspool of anxiety and urges and triggers. And so the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is name 5 things you can see, name 4 things you can touch, name 3 things you can hear, name 2 things you can smell, and name 1 thing you can taste. And if that's a great exercise to make sure that you're not just coming into the present, but you're staying in the present, and that can ground you. And of course, we always love our breathing, right? Or just getting moving. And if you don't have a setback prevention plan, I do recommend getting one. And if you need one, there is one on my website. And of course, another way to help you help and identify your triggers is making sure that, with that setback prevention plan, you can have it all laid out, because that also helps you see if you're having any issues with sleep, because believe it or not, sometimes people will look at it and go, oh my gosh, like I'm having more triggers in the morning, or I'm having more triggers in the evening, and they'll go, oh my goodness, it's because I'm noticing that I'm not sleeping well, or I'm not eating well, or I'm not staying hydrated. So remember to take care of yourself. Treat yourself like you would take care of your plants. Or maybe that's a bad example, because I actually shouldn't use that as an example, because I walked past one of my plants and I was like, oh no, you need water. So maybe you should take care of yourself like you take care of your pets, because I don't know about you guys, but my pets are spoiled. Also be mindful about emotional pain, because when we no longer have our DOC to numb our pain, or as we start to examine our wounds, emotional pain is inevitable. So this really can resonate for a lot of people that I've worked with, because a lot of us may have strained relationships with our family and our friends, especially as we're starting to pull away from some of them because they may not be the healthiest for us. I've talked before about how I had to take a break from somebody, and that's okay. We're putting in healthy boundaries. And I did a podcast on FOO, family of origin, and so that may come into play. And there are tools that can help with all of these things. Don't be afraid to reach out if you need counseling. I've talked before about my counselor. She was amazing. I think just about everybody in our family has gone to her. Like, she is a rock star, and I just adore her. There's always, you can go to support groups and to meetings, because, you're tired of this saying, but it's true. The opposite of addiction is connection, because we thrive in isolation, right? So don't forget about building up your sober circle and your healing hive. When we're in recovery, triggers don't have to be something that we fight alone. It's all about building that support system. Your sobriety circle and your healing hive, these are people that are in your life because they want to be there. I don't know what it is about being in recovery and being in healing, that feeling of being a burden. I know that feeling. I've had that feeling. It still crops up from time to time where you're just like, well, I'm going to call so and so. And then in the back of your head, you're like, no, they're probably super busy right now. Or they don't really want to hear from me. And you just make up all these random excuses. And I'm telling you, that's that addict voice. That's that you're not enough voice. And it's not real. So kick it to the curb. It doesn't need to be there. These are people who have your back. They've been through the trenches, same as you, and they're the ones who will help you and they'll rise with you. When you're feeling low, they're the ones who will lift you up. During social settings, we may experience anxiety or unease when we're around a place that we may have used our DOC or that's connected to the people or things that we used with. The same can happen with our healing. Like if you see a picture or even smell something that brings back a memory, that's not uncommon. So you're going to need those tools to learn how to navigate those things. So don't worry. Like I'm going to go over like tools in another podcast on how to face those things. Also, I'm going to mention it here in this podcast, but I'll talk about it in upcoming podcasts. Some of the tools you're going to be like, whoa, there's no way I can do that. That's okay. Just keep an open mind for when I say something and you're like, that's not for me. Just keep it in the back of your head because you may want to use it on in a different time. It's normal to feel tired or even like feel like an illness, like because we may not realize it, but being tired, even after withdrawal has passed, it can make us more susceptible to our triggers. That's why I like to mention HALT. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and blast, bored, lonely, angry, stressed, and tired, whenever we talk about triggers, because you need to be more mindful when you're first coming into recovery, because going through all these things that you're going through, it is normal to feel tired and feel sick because you are going through a huge change in your life. So give yourself grace. And you're putting so much on your plate that you have to make sure that you're not trying to think of yourself as going to a buffet, and I know in my head all I can think of is you're trying to just pile all these things onto your plate, right? And you're going to your table and things are falling off of your plate because you're just trying to do it all at once. And it's an all-you-can-eat buffet, and you're just I'm going to get everything all in one thing. No, it's okay. It's all you can eat, so just put on what you can fit, and then you can go back, right? Because you don't have to do it all at once. The buffet's still going to be there. So just put on what you can fit on your plate. When you're going to worry about identifying triggers, knowing how to identify triggers can take time. You'll get there. You don't have to know everything all at once. This is a journey. What's that saying? It's a marathon, not a sprint, because otherwise you'll wear yourself out. And how do I know this? Because I did it. I was so excited when I started my journey of healing and emotional sobriety. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I ran out and I got every recovery book. I was going to AA. I was going to an Anon group. I was going to group therapy. I was online with a support group on there. And then I was doing another recovery group. I was volunteering on there. And so I was doing like 1,100 things. And then I was going to counseling. Did I say that already? And so I was like, oh, and I had started an Anon group in my town. So I was like, this is amazing. Plus, I was working. And so, whatever. And I was just like, this is great. And what happened was I got recovery burnout. And I was just like, this is so much. Like, I can't do it all. And so I actually had to step back from a couple of things because it was so much. My life had become recovery everything and healing everything. And I was like, all right, I got to cut something out. And so I did. I stepped back from like two things. I was like, I got pick and choose. And because I wanted to really make sure that what I was involved in, I was actually learning from and not just doing it just because. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, don't heap everything onto your plate. Just do things one at a time or two at a time. Whatever you feel you can handle. Otherwise, it's just going to be too overwhelming and you're not going to appreciate what you're learning or you're not going to absorb it. And so, sometimes something may trigger you and it will be a complete surprise. And not only is that okay, it's normal. So as you're working on figuring out what your triggers are, just be gentle with yourself. Take your time. And here are some ways that you can start identifying some of your triggers. You can keep a trigger diary to track some patterns. You can journal about situations or emotions that cause discomfort or urges. You can have that awareness, so recognize like your physical sensations, like a racing heart or a tight chest that happen with emotional triggers. If you have an accountability partner, which should not be your relationship partner, or trusted friends, sponsors, life coach, counselor, ask them for some insight. Look for feedback from them. And then, of course, when it comes to managing your triggers, one of the toughest things is knowing how to handle and manage them. One of the great things when it comes to triggers is that there are a ton of different ways to manage them. And so I mentioned urge surfing, and this is just a way to ride that wave of a trigger. And I'm not going to get too deep into that because I did an episode of that last month, so you can look into that if you want. But you can practice mindfulness. Again, going back to, relying on your connections, your sobriety circle, your healing hive. Go to meetings, find a support group. Just please don't do it on your own. Develop that setback plan. But as we learn to identify and navigate our triggers, we're lessening their control over us. We're putting ourselves in the driver's seat, and we're the ones in control over our own minds. And we're also learning how powerful we are in the process. And in that power, we're learning how, to heal and grow, not just in recovery, but in ourselves. And so if you're up for a challenge this week, grab a journal and track your triggers. Write down what happened, how you felt, and what you did to handle it. And I want to hear from you. Have you noticed certain triggers that catch you off guard? Share your experiences with me. You can reach out to me on Facebook. You can find me at Bookends of Addiction Recovery. It's a little different than than here. Or you can just leave me a comment under my latest blog if you want. I also have a dedicated worksheet just for this particular podcast, so you can find me there, or you can download. Sorry, I'll get this right. You can download the worksheet for this particular podcast. So whether this is your first day, your 100th day, or your 100th first day, you can do this. And how do I know? Because I've been where you are. You are more powerful than you realize. And every step you take, no matter how small, is progress. Triggers don't define you. The tools and support you're gathering, that's what's shaping the new you. So keep going. And remember, you're not alone. Don't forget to visit my website, bookendsofrecovery.com, where you can find other helpful worksheets. Like I said, especially one that's, complements today's episode. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, because when you sign up for the newsletter, you get exclusive worksheets. And let's stay connected. And next week, we'll continue with the next part of our series on triggers. Now, you don't want to miss it, because if you've been feeling overwhelmed by emotional triggers in social settings, I've got some eye-opening strategies to help you out. So this is Laura, wishing you a beautiful day, because you deserve it. Thank you so much for stopping by.